All right. Our next topic is one that we've actually had a number of questions on already, and that is software identity. Everybody's favorite topic, I think. Turning it over to MegaZone and Chris Coffin to talk a little bit about CPE, pURL, and all things software identity.
Sounds good. Thanks, Alec. This is Chris.
Hello.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I was going to say, are you on the line, NZ?
I am here.
Very good. I am just trying to pull up my slides. If you bear with me a second. And while I'm waiting for that, I know we had a couple of questions that we might want to start, at least just a brief info, and we can cover it a little more later. But there was a question in regards to records that are awaiting analysis. And that term struck me right away, that it's what the NVD site uses. So I had posted, I think, in the chat that the NVD is really, could be considered an ADP, maybe one of the first ADPs, but they are a downstream consumer of the CVE list. So CVE.org and the CVE program is where CVEs originate from. And NVD is a consumer of that list, which then provides enriched data, or traditionally has provided enriched data. And they generally add CVSS, CWE, and CPE information. But what Alec has, I think, covered pretty well in some of the earlier slides was that we are now sort of moving away from that. And I think we'll, not really moving away from it, but moving to the point where the CVE program is adding much more data to the records, and we're doing that through the Federation. And that allows the CNAs themselves to provide things such as CVSS, CWE, CPE, and many other things. And it struck me that when Chris was just going through his example, and maybe I can share it a little later, but the 2024-0015 record, there was actually more data and more information in that record on the CVE.org website than there is in the NVD vulnerability page, because it's sitting in awaiting analysis. So the extra information that the CVE program adds, or that the CISA ADP adds, is actually additional data that doesn't even appear on the NVD site today. And I can, let me just do I'll just drop that into the chat.
Yeah, I mean, a number of us said in the past that ideally NVD would become an actual ADP and feed their information into the CVE program so that downstream consumers could pull from one location, just pull from the CVE program, and they get everything. Because if you pull just from NVD, you will not be getting everything, because they do not pull in all of the information. That they only basically pull in the base of the CVE record. So all that enhanced data that's in the CVE program, you will not necessarily be getting if you just pull from NVD. So right today, unfortunately, if you want what NVD provides and everything else, you have to pull from both locations. Like I said, I know we'd love to see them join the program officially and start providing information as an ADP, and then you just be able to pull the CVE record and get it all in one-stop shop. But yeah, with all the enhancements and all the things that are being added to the CVE record, you may not be seeing those through NVD.
Correct. Yep. So the 2024-15 record, if you want to compare it with what's on CVE.org, you can definitely see those differences right now. So some of this was already covered. I jotted down just sort of an intro to these slides, but and I know, Kent, you covered it early on with the 25th anniversary slides, but the CVE program, long time ago, galaxy far, far away, we only covered, a few pieces of data, the ID, the description, and a public reference. That was it. And we've come a long way since that time, which was probably around the 2016 timeframe, that we started shifting to providing more data and becoming more of a one-stop shop within the CVE program. So the Federation efforts definitely have helped us shift in that direction. We're relying more on the folks that understand the vulnerabilities and their own products, the CNAs, you guys, to provide that needed information. So in order to do that, we had to provide a schema, or what we now call the CVE record format, that is our JSON schema that defines what information can be provided and how it's stored in the CVE record. And we've been slowly, well, I shouldn't say slowly, it's been pretty quickly ramping up in the past couple of years, to the point where we're now at the 5.1.0 release. We actually have a 5.1.1 release that's in release candidate status that is just about to ship, and I'll cover a little more in a second. But that format is on GitHub. You can look at all of our issues and you can look at the schema itself. It's publicly available. See. I have to control my own slides. CVE record format today, it allows CNAs to include multiple bits of data in regards to affected products and versions. So you can do that via product and version strings, or you can define collection URLs and package names. We also even allow common platform enumeration, or CPEs, to be defined in an array, and we've allowed that for a little while now. But what we found after we implemented that in the schema was that it's not necessarily complete. There's some missing data in our CPE implementation, and we needed something that would be more robust and would allow CNAs to author much more complex CPE relationships, and to provide CPEs in different ways, because there's not just the identifiers, but there's also match strings and match string ranges. Did I miss anything on that, MZ? You have anything to add?
No, I don't think I just add. I mean, real world examples, kind of learning from the real world is, as people started to use that CPE array, different CNAs or CISAs and ADP were using that array, it became obvious pretty quickly that it was insufficient, because there were assumptions of what was in there that a lot of people had that were just not necessarily what was actually in there, because it was just an array of CPE values. There was no way to tell were these affected, were these fixed, were these something product CPEs, and what we were seeing was all of the above. Depending on a CNA, some CNA, I don't want to call anybody out because no one's did anything wrong, because it wasn't defined, right? It was just how, here's an array, I'll populate it. We had a CNA who was giving all their fixed versions, and a CNA who was providing products. We had CISA who was basically listing vulnerable things or affected things, which meant that the data really wasn't usable downstream, because you didn't know if you tried to automate anything based off that, like a scan tool or a third-party tool pull that in. You wouldn't know, am I looking at, what am I looking at here? Am I supposed to be scanning for these versions to make sure that I'm not running these, or that I'm on these, or, so yeah, that's why we redid CPE basically.
Yep. And yeah, I mean, the way the CPEs were provided in the array could have been a match string, could have been the actual leaf node identifier name. It wasn't clear what those were.
Hey guys, we have a question in the Q&A. I'll just read it out loud for you.
Sure.
It says, is there any effort in regards to the NVD managed CPE dictionary?
Is there any effort in relation to the CPE dictionary? So the CVE program doesn't control the NVD dictionary, but we are working towards allowing CNAs to provide CPEs and to store those within the CVE records. Coordination with the NIST NVD team is something I actually had on a later slide that we need to work out and try to make sure that we're consistent with what's provided. And that could result maybe in the NVD team, using the CVE feed as, a feed into the official CPE dictionary. And that's, I think federation-wise, that's the way it should work. The CNAs are providing their CPEs, and the NVD can put those into the official dictionary. Does that help?
Yeah, I'd add that Note that CNAs don't have to follow that dictionary, and we in discussions there are CNAs who are not planning to follow the official dictionary because it's not official. It's NVDs. It's not like it's globally like this is the standard for the world. It's NVDs, and NVD's own dictionary has internal inconsistencies and error, I will say. So because it's kind of accreted over a number of years. So there have been discussions among some people about setting up some other dictionary system. Nothing currently right now, and it could happen. Some kind of a federated dictionary and not have NVD, one entity trying to manage a monolithic dictionary. We've seen federation work really well for CVE, for example.
Yep. So why CPE? I just wanted to make sure we answer the why question. So CPE is not the only identifier out there, but it is an important one because a lot of the community has been relying on the CPE information provided by the NIST NVD team, and have been using that for many years for software identification. Also, the CISA Secure by Design pledge that was published in the recent past is pushing organizations to start providing CWEs and CPEs as part of their CVE records. And I think it's within a year of signing the pledge, they should be providing that information in their CVE records. So we need to have a way of storing that within the CVE records directly. So what that came to was, well, how do we do it? What do we use to store CPE information within the CVE records? There was a number of choices and a number of directions we could have gone, but I think the one that made the most sense was to actually take a bit of what the NIST NVD team did with their CVE API 2.0 schema. So what they created in their JSON schema was an implementation of the CPE applicability language, which allows flexibility in defining CPEs, identifier names, match string ranges, as well as some Boolean logic and complex relationships to show, what platform a certain application needed to exist on in order to be vulnerable, and so on and so forth. So there was some definite flexibility and relationships that could be defined using the CPE applicability language. And this was a JSON schema that was already defined, and more importantly, was already understood and being used by much of the community, like, say, for instance, the tool vendors that consumed this CPE data from the NVD. So essentially what we've done is we've forked their configurations schema into the CVE record format, which means you could use the data from the NVD vulnerability feed regarding CPE applicability language, and you could drop that into a CVE record as is, and there's no differences. There's some minor changes with what's required, but no real differences that cause any issue. MZ, you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered a lot of it. There are a lot of advantages we saw. This discussion went on for quite a while, as those who were part of the QWG discussions on this and other working groups and the board and everything. But I think this one came out on top, this suggestion, and there were several proposals because of kind of the existing infrastructure and how easily it's slipped into things. As I said earlier, we'd love to see NVD become an ADP, and using this syntax also allows them, if they do that, to just do what they've always done, because they can just drop their data in here. Or if a CNA wants to just update their existing records by copying what NVD did, if they're happy with it, it's cut and paste, basically, one field change because we had a conflict in naming. But yeah, it would seem to be the most benefit for the least friction, I would say.
That's right. And so we probably shouldn't spend a ton of time on these, but I did put a couple of examples on the screen. It might be a little difficult to read, but this example actually is in our CVE schema. It's one of our the full advanced example. But basically, you can read through and see that it affects a couple of different version ranges with very specific cutoffs. And we've represented that with the CPE applicability here. This is just a part of the CVE record. This is the new part. But essentially here it's covering, it's got an OR operator for all the different affected platforms in this block. And then up here, it's giving you a specific set of CPEs and ranges that are affected. And then it ANDs these together so that you now have these example enterprises, is the name of the product in these, which would appear on these 3 different platforms. So this is essentially the CPE applicability language in an example. I provided just a slight variation of that here, which you don't see the affected platforms here, but it is a little bit bigger. And this also shows you that you don't necessarily have to define the ranges. In this case, I did a range here. Here, you could almost read these as these are the CPE leaf nodes or the CPE identifier names for specific versions that are affected in this case. So just another way to define the same data.
One of the nice things about this approach is it gives CNAs some flexibility in how they represent things, what works best for them. It's not a one size fits all. You know, if you want to enumerate every CPE you have that's affected or fixed, because you can do, tell it if it's which version it is, go ahead and do that. If you want to do ranges, go ahead and do that. And so this, basically all the use cases we were already seeing, people trying to use the array, there are ways to do those use cases in this format.
That's right. And one important note, I don't know if I mentioned it already, the CPE applicability block that we're looking at right now as part of the CVE record is completely optional. It is not a required piece of the CVE record. So if a CNA wants to provide this data, this will allow them to. So, but it's not required. So future CPE additions process, just a heads up, this might not be available in Vulnogram right away, but I did get word in the past couple of days that our Vulnogram developer, Chandan, I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with him, but he is currently looking into this and he's starting to prepare for this. So we may have it fairly quickly after the schema update. But more to come on that later. We'll probably, I think I mentioned this earlier, we'll need to coordinate with the NIST NVD team going forward to ensure CPE consistency in the official NVD CPE dictionary. And those talks and that coordination has already started, but there's plenty more to do. So that is in progress though. And then also, we probably have some option or some work that we could do on helping CNAs define CPEs, maybe store some of that information within the CVE program so that you don't have to redefine it every time. One of the things I think the Vulnogram developer had mentioned was that when you fill out your product and version fields, it may start to define your CPE for you. Based on what you enter in those fields. That was one of the things he wanted to make sure was part of that Vulnogram update. And obviously you might want to change that or tweak it, but at least you don't have to define the CPE directly in that case. You could just let it start to build it for you. Let's see, is this okay. So before we move on to that, CPE is going to be in the next release of the schema. And that will be 5.1.1. Like I said, that's in release candidate status at the moment. Chris and the CVE automation team are now working on getting that into CVE services, specifically in the test environment, I think pretty soon. And then we're looking maybe to have that released and in production, maybe beginning of next year. So we're moving pretty quickly towards that. Lisa, did you have a comment? Oh, maybe it wasn't in here. Okay, never mind. So we have a little bit more time left. So we've talked a lot about CPE. We know that there's other identifiers that other communities and others feel are important. And CPE shouldn't be the only one, obviously. So we may want to think about a few things. We may want to start looking at other identifiers that we can start working towards and supporting within the CVE record format. We may even want to go the route of adding an other, sort of free-form product identifier that folks can use, similar to what we have today with metrics. So that's actually being taken advantage of by the CISA ADP for SSVC, which we didn't previously define directly within the CVE record format. So yeah, we definitely want to support other things. pURL seems to be sort of the biggest in the room at this point. And I think for the open source community, this would be a big plus. And I think there was even someone on the list earlier that mentioned they'd like to see pURL identifiers as well. So just a little bit of background on what pURL is, for those of you that don't know. That's definitely something that open source communities are using at this time. It's a package URL and an attempt to standardize an approach to reliably identify and locate software packages. So I ripped off some of this text from the pURL spec, but essentially you have a lot of different package managers out there that are working with software packages in, say, Linux distributions, for instance, and they may use different ways of identifying packages, and there's some nuance between those. And pURL is an attempt to bring all that together. So why would someone use pURL? And this actually probably applies to most identifiers as well, I think, in every case. But you want to be able to reliably reference the same software package across inventory and scanning tools. There could be things you want to monitor, such as versions, dependencies, and license across multiple package managers. And given what we're trying to do, help track down known vulnerabilities in packages based on those specific packages, as well as maybe multiple incarnations of the same code across different packaging systems, and they're labeled in different ways. And then there's could be other analysis, such as building dependency graphs of packages. So, and I'm sure there's plenty of other use cases for this. I think I pulled this from some of the pURL documentation, but this really applies to all identifiers. So I think having a way to describe or provide CNAs and record authors with multiple ways of describing a product that is affected or not affected is a good thing. And I think we need to support whatever identifiers are commonly used. So pURL seems to be the next step after CPE. I'd love to hear feedback on that as well from anybody on the call if they have opinions on anything else, or if they'd just like to see us move towards pURL as a next priority. This gives you a quick rundown of how pURL is composed. I think it listed 7 components on some documentation, but 6 on others, because really these are the things that change. The scheme, I think, always starts with PKG. But then you have a type, namespace, name and version qualifiers, and subpath. And you can see some examples here at the top of the screen. And if you want to visit the pURL spec, I've listed that here, and I'll pop that in chat as well. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, go ahead, MZ.
Yeah, I would say we've had a couple people say in the working group, like, oh, we should support pURL. It'd be great to have pURL. What we really need, Chris and I have talked about this. Neither one of us are pURL experts. I don't work with pURL at all in my job. I don't think Chris does. And so what we really need, we're happy to see this, in the QWG, we're happy to keep growing, the CVE record to support these things. But what we would really love to see is somebody who is interested in seeing pURL supported, who works with pURL, who has some expertise, put together a proposal. That's what we really need is a starting point, right? This is how I think it should be represented, because that always helps anyone who's been on working groups you throw a random cloudy idea out there and it just kind of like floats around for a bit. But if somebody puts something concrete down and says, I think this is how it should be, then the debate starts. That's when the discussion really gets going of, is this good? Oh, I like that, but I'd change this. Or here's a complete counter proposal, right? That's when you start getting ideas flowing. And so if somebody really wants to see pURL, I'd love to see somebody come to the QWG with or put a proposal down, open a ticket, in our GitHub, something that proposes this is how I would love to see pURL represented in CVEs, in the CVE record, and that would really help get the ball rolling there, I think. So if you have an interest in this, join us.
Yep. Yeah. And did you mention it? It's the QWG. So we are
QWG, yes.
the QWG, the Quality Working Group. So if you want more information on that, let us know. We'll send you the details. But MZ and I are both co-chairs of the QWG, and these are discussions that we will be having. So please join us and participate if you want. And that's it. I think we finished right
on time. Yep.
Yeah.
You two are amazing. You guys are great. Thanks so much. This is really terrific.